Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious,
that we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family,
regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Good morning, Crosspointe. Thank you for joining us. Now, I don't know about you, but over these past 2 to 3 weeks, as the coronavirus curve continues to climb, it has really just become clear to me, it's finally sinking in that we are in this for the long haul. And I think I already knew that here, but I'm really just starting to accept it here. So, like the rest of you, I am trying to shift gears and adjust and figure out not just plan B, but what feels like plan X, Y, or Z. And it's got me thinking a lot about this idea of intentional community. I've begun to realize that if I am not intentional about the relationships that I value most in my life, that I could potentially go long periods of time without communicating with people that I actually adore. And that by doing that, I would actually be creating distance in those relationships. And so I'm accepting that since this is going to be our reality for a while, that I am going to have to be more intentional about cultivating the relationships that I really want in my life. Now, this is difficult for me because by nature, I tend to be more passive when it comes to taking initiative to connect. I tend to prefer and rely on what we'll call organic, casual, unplanned connections that happen when we're all around each other at work or at school or church or all those other large group activities that we're not really doing right now. And so I tend to think like, I'm friendly. I'm sure connections will just happen when I meet wonderful people. But the truth that I am currently accepting is that I can't rely on connections happening that way anymore. So now, as a person who's been more passive, I am having to take stock of who are the people that I really want in my life. And I'm accepting that I am going to need to put in some extra effort to nurture those relationships. I have got to nudge myself out of passivity and into intentionality. And it is in that same spirit that I want to take a moment to talk with parents. So one of the things that you might be missing right now are the voices and the input of your broader community, your broader support network of those other adults that speak into the lives of your children and thereby support your family. These are often teachers, coaches, small group leaders, mentors. These are the other adults that partner with you in guiding your children. At Crosspointe, we place a high value on the relationship between children and students and their small group leaders. We know that a small group leader plays a key role in shaping the development of a young person's faith. They can also serve as a compassionate support to the child and a consistent reinforcement for the parent. And so these are the influences that help to mold a young person. And they also let a parent know that they don't have to do everything alone. We encourage you to be intentional, parents, about cultivating relationships with the adults that are speaking into your child's life on a regular basis. However, in our current reality, parents, you might be missing the support that is offered by these other caring adults. Because school's not in session and small groups are taking a break right now, you might be left feeling pretty alone in your parenting. So, Family Ministries wants to step in to support you. So we are offering an opportunity for parents to sign up for one-on-one Zoom-based coffee chats with our Family Ministries staff. And we, as a staff, we enter into those conversations with no agenda. We are just a willing ear to listen to what's going on in your family right now. So if what you need is someone to just listen, we are more than happy to do that. However, if you feel like you are just so deep in the weeds of an issue with your child or with your broader family dynamic, and you're just interested in having another perspective, we're happy to do that as well. Our goal is to step into the gap and serve as a support for your family, to serve as sort of a third voice in your family dynamic right now, because those other third voices that we typically rely on are a little further away, a little harder to access in this season. So to sign up for these coffee chats, parents, we're going to ask that you go to crosspoint.org/coffee-chats. Also, Crosspointe, if you are looking for other ways to participate in what we're up to as a community, there are some ways that you can contribute financially. You can do that through stocks, through PayPal, through mail-in checks, through debit cards. And so to do that, you're going to want to go to crosspoint.org/contribute, or you can text crosspointenc to 77977. And when you do that, a link will be sent to your phone, and then you can just click on that and choose how you want to contribute. I just want to say, Crosspointe, I continue to be very grateful to be part of this community. And I just want to encourage you to take those intentional steps in your relationships. Because it's in fact through that intentionality and that continual showing up for others that we continue to be the church, even when we're not meeting in person.
Who are weary, come to Him, all who are low. Remember now that He will not leave us. We have no strength and we're on our own. We take our burdens and lay them down at the cross where hope is found. You lift our souls upon the grave. Only love like yours can save. Lead us down to rivers of mercy. Lead us down to your streams of peace. Restore in us a breath of creation. Awaken us a love that believes. We take our burdens and lay them down at the cross where hope is down at the cross where hope is found. You lift our souls up from the grave. Only love like yours can save. We take our burdens and lay them down at the cross where hope is found. You lift our souls up from the grave. Only love like yours can save. Only love like yours can save. Only love like yours can save.
I'm excited to introduce to you a guest musician. David Wimbish is going to play one of his songs for us this morning. But before he does, I want to just offer a few quick thoughts about lament. Lament is a form of poetry that you see used quite often in the Hebrew scriptures by the prophets and other writers. Lament is a form of protest. It's a cry of grief and anger and anguish. It is meant to draw people's attention to wake people up and open their eyes to see suffering and injustice. And sometimes it is directed at God. God's asked questions like, how long will you wait? Do you see what's going on here? Are you going to do something about it? Lament is also representative in that it can be really helpful to us to help us process our own emotions. Even today, artists, musicians, poets can sometimes have a way of expressing things that we cannot. Maybe you've had an experience where your world has fallen apart in some way, and it seems like other people don't even notice. Life just goes on, and you feel alone. And then a song, or a piece of art, or a poem, or something meets you in that moment, and the artist expresses a similar experience in a way that makes you feel less alone. I like what the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard has said about the role of the poet in society. What is a poet? An unhappy man who hides deep anguish in his heart, but whose lips are so formed that when the sigh and cry pass through them, it sounds like lovely music. And people flock around the poet and say, "Sing again soon." That is, may new sufferings torment your soul, but your lips be fashioned as before. For the cry would only frighten us, but the music, that is blissful. So lament gives voice to our confusion and doubt. And David's song, 2:4, has done that for me over the past couple of years. I hope that it can do that for you as well.
Hi, my name's David Wimbish, and I write music for a band called The Collection and also some solo work. And I'm going to be playing my song 2:4, which is named after Isaiah 2:4, which is a verse that talks about beating swords into plowshares and nations no longer taking up swords against other nations. And I wrote this song after the Orlando nightclub shooting a few years back. It feels pretty rare, honestly, to have something that's so emotional happen that the only way for me to process those emotions is to write a song, and especially rare for one to come so quickly. But the emotions of that event were running so high that I went out and cried on my stoop for a while, and kind of this song poured out almost immediately from that event. And I think it's been a song that I've returned to pretty regularly because unfortunately that kind of violence, especially against minority groups of people, in this country has not really stopped or subsided, and in many ways has been very elevated even in the last couple of weeks. So this is a song about mourning and lament and hoping for some kind of change through the processing of grief.
I was nauseous to wake up this morning to a sun with no sympathy, for a trigger pulled without warning, bearing holes in humanity. The way you always used to talk was boring, but now the answers come easily. It's just the way it's gotta be, my darling. We'll make a matchbook out of history. Before the bodies had names and parents, we made a martyr out of our beliefs and said that all of the same things would scare us. But we were tough because of ancestry, and every god would seek to divide us. Every saint would cry silently, but we would hold on to the axe before us, even if we lose a couple trees. A couple trees. Maybe there's a sun behind the clouds. Maybe there's a face behind the funeral shrouds. When will the rain let up? When will the rain let up? When will the rain let up? I'm soaked to the bone. I'm soaked to the bone. And everybody is just dust and water, making islands in a violent sea, until the waves can take away our daughters. And one by one our sons violently. I've had enough of all your bold prayers to gain applause for your apology. Did you forget that love can't give favor, or to melt arms into machinery? Maybe there's a sun behind the clouds. Maybe there's a face behind the funeral shroud. When will the rain let up? When will the rain let up? When will the rain let up? I'm soaked to the bone. I'm soaked to the bone. They're taking our homes. They're breaking our bones. They're taking us. Maybe there's a face behind the clouds. They're taking us. Maybe there's
morning, everybody. Happy 4th of July weekend. It's nice to see you. I wanted to tell you a teeny tiny confession this morning, and I hope you don't hold it against me, but I don't like yard sales or rummage sales or garage sales or flea markets. My parents used to take us to flea markets all the time when I was a kid, and I was always trying to find a reason not to go, a reason to stay home. And sometimes I was able to do that and sometimes I weren't. I just don't like looking through other people's stuff. And I really don't like hosting my own sales. I do like getting rid of my stuff, but I don't like having to go through it and determine its value. I don't want to look at other people's stuff and determine the value of their things. I mean, I don't feel qualified to determine the value of your memories and your things. Plus, I am a horrible negotiator, and I would just rather not have to make those kind of decisions. And more than that, more than going to the sales, I said I hate hosting them, and mostly it's because inevitably afterwards you have to go through all of that stuff, and you have to sift through what's left and figure out what in the world to do with it. There's future trips to the dump, to Goodwill, and I understand why we need to do that. It's important and all of those things, but I just don't have the patience for it. So that's my true confession. And I have to tell you that I've been challenged on that a little bit lately. I was reading recently the author who is now passed, Phyllis Tickle. She's an author, theologian, she's a poet. And she famously talked about the church's rummage sales. And so basically she looked at history and said that every 500 years or so, the church takes a look at itself. It takes a look at its long-held beliefs, its traditions, its practices, and it determines what is no longer relevant, what needs to change, what needs to remain, what needs to be reworked, what needs to completely go. And for those of you that know me know I love history, and I won't bore you with it for too long, but I want to give you a couple of examples of this. So about 500 years after the birth of Christianity, toward the end and the decline of the Roman Empire, there was a council that came together to determine Christian doctrine. And this was just really basic Christian doctrine that we would think of it as basic now, but at the time it was a big deal. But it still influences us today. Up until this point, the churches as a whole, individual churches could just determine what they felt was authoritative, who they wanted to read, practices that they wanted to have. They set their own rules of how churches would function. And so when this council came, they determined as a whole what we now would call orthodox and what the standards were for those who called themselves Christian. If you called yourself Christian, these were the things that you did and these are the things that you believed. So about 500 years after that, there was something called the Great Schism. And this is when the church split over doctrine again. And what we were left with was the Orthodox Church in the East and the Catholic Church in the West. And about 500 years after that, we have probably the most familiar of the rummage sales, the Christian rummage sales, and it's the Protestant Reformation, when we had another split, and that separated the Catholics and the Protestants. So during each of these times, the church was doing what I said. They were looking at themselves. They took a long, hard look in the mirror, determined what was still important, determined if there were things that they had just gotten so wrong, and what made sense to no longer hold on to so tightly. Church rummage sales really are a sign of the church listening to the Spirit of God, listening to prophetic voices. They're really a sign of growth. Now, for all of you that have been calculating, it has been about 500 years since the Protestant Reformation that began around 1517-ish. And if calculations are the same, then we should be beginning close to the start of another church rummage sale. And some of you might think we're already in the middle of that. Some people do with things that are happening in our churches and in our societies today. Prophets that we've been talking about, these are people who basically at their very core base level were calling for organizational and personal rummage sales. They called for individuals, they called for entire people groups, in this case, the reading of the Old Testament, the Israelites, to reevaluate who they were, where they felt God wanted them to be, and where they were and where they were going. Prophets were tasked with speaking the truth when nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to see a prophet coming. It wasn't the happiest of jobs because the prophets always came to shine this light, this flashlight in the dark places and talk about the inevitable consequences if paths didn't change. Nobody liked the prophets. So Jeremiah, one of my favorite prophets, he was a prophet during the time of the Jewish exile, when the Israelites had been conquered and captured by the Babylonians. And understandably, their lives, the Israelite lives, had been uprooted. They were unimaginably difficult, and the Israelites had to make a lot of tough choices. What does it mean to live as an exile? What does it mean when everything you expected and planned no longer exists? How do you rethink that? How do you rethink your traditions when you no longer have the things that rooted you to them in the first place? And so many of the Israelites, especially the Israelite leadership, they determined that blending into society was just simply easier. I mean, it meant that you could have better jobs. It meant that people wouldn't harass you as much. It probably meant an easier life for your kids. But it also meant that they had to sacrifice something. They had to sacrifice integrity. They had to sacrifice the way that they had historically been taught to view and treat other people, how they interacted with one another. In order to blend in with society, they had to turn a blind eye to injustices in their midst. They had to actively practice apathy. They had to anesthetize themselves to things that were really going on around them. They had to pretend that things were fine the way that they were. They had to ignore things. They had to refuse to be bothered by things that they should have been bothered by. And so Jeremiah and really the prophets in general, they were hated because they pointed these things out. They were pointing out actions and inactions and beliefs and things that people wanted to ignore. They wanted to pretend they weren't there in order to keep their lives simple and orderly and predictable. But the prophets refused to allow people to forget that things were not as they should be. And you can see this in Jeremiah 6:13 through 15. Jeremiah tells the Israelites, "From the least to the greatest, all are greedy for gain. Prophets and priests alike, all practice deceit. They dress the wounds of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. Are they ashamed of their detestable conduct? No, they have no shame at all. They don't even know how to blush." And then Jeremiah's contemporary, the prophet Ezekiel, he was saying the same things in another area around the same time. And he stated the same thing like this. This is Ezekiel 13. "Because they lead my people astray, saying peace when there is no peace, and because when a flimsy wall is built, they cover it with whitewash. Therefore, tell those who cover it with whitewash that it's going to fall. Rain will come in torrents, and I will send hailstones hurtling down, and violent winds will burst forth. And when the wall collapses, people will not ask you, 'Where's the whitewash you covered it with?'" So these prophets were calling for a re-examination of things. They were calling for really a rummage sale. Jeremiah was accusing the people of addressing the wounds, the deep, serious wounds, really with simplicity. He said, you're really giving people a Band-Aid when what they need is heart surgery. And Ezekiel was saying that people were basically covering up really bad, shoddy construction with bad paint. And then when things got bad and the rain tore down these walls and people were dying of sepsis, people didn't stand around and say, what kind of paint brand did you use? They were asking, what in the world just happened? What caused this deep issue to begin with? And this, I think, is the challenge that the Old Testament prophets offer for us today. This is the role of the prophetic voice, to shine light in places that we're afraid to step into, dark corners that we ignore or we forget about, and things that need to be re-examined. Maybe these are long-held beliefs that made sense to us in our past. Maybe our understanding of God has grown or changed as we have, but maybe we still want to hang on to some of those things. Maybe it's prejudices, worldviews. Maybe it's a grudge, a hurt, anger that we have in some of those dark corners that come out when we least expect it. Or maybe we pull it out at strategic times when it's convenient for us. When we find those things, it's time for a rummage sale. It's time for a personal rummage sale. Sometimes we know there's things inside of us that we forget about, or we don't even know are there that have a light shined on them. It's almost like we realize, when you put hand sanitizer on your hands and you don't realize you have a cut until you put that hand sanitizer on it, and then it stings. Sometimes things in our lives are like that too. Maybe it is when we expect someone to act a certain way because of how they look, and they don't meet up those expectations. Maybe where we expect them to act somewhere because of where they grew up or where we grew up. and we don't realize that we believe those things until we're face to face with some of our biases. Maybe we thought we were over a past hurt or a past grudge until that particular person shows up and speaks up again, and that flares up, that sting comes out. Maybe there's pride or fear or terrible motives that we push into the corners and that we have to fight to keep buried. Maybe we don't like to admit that our privilege hurts other people and it hurts society. Perhaps it's long-held beliefs that really don't allow us to love our neighbor the way we should. Maybe it's that our lives always come back to this us-them type of reality. Maybe we're simply realizing that our view of God is too small, but it's a little scary to require ourselves to expand that view. And maybe we realize that these things are in our lives, but we're afraid of what it means to change them or to bring about change in our world. But regardless, there are always things that need personal rummage sales in our lives. Often, so much of our energy is spent pretending that we have peace, saying peace, peace about things in our lives. But really what we need is a good flashlight in some of those dark places. Really what we've done is put a Band-Aid on a serious wound. Often, so many times in our life, we make our peace dependent upon the actions of others, and we use that as an excuse to not make change in our life. Maybe we say things like, I'll have peace when our boss gives us a raise, or when I get that job, or when our child makes good decisions, or when things are going the way they should, or when I don't have to talk to an upsetting person, or when things go back to normal, when the election is over. Whatever it is, there's a million things that we could put in that blank. But instead of relying on outside circumstances and others to bring peace, we are called to be actively responsible for welcoming peace into our own lives and for bringing peace into our world. Because we, like the prophets, have been tasked with working for peace in our own lives and in the world around us. There's this beautiful psalm in Psalm 85:10. It's actually a song that we don't know what it sounded like, but it's written as a song. And it gives us this beautiful look at peace. It says, mercy and truth shall meet. Peace and justice shall kiss. Mercy and truth shall meet. Justice and peace shall kiss. So there's some difficulty in translating the meaning of this verse into English. It's been translated multiple ways, with love, unfailing love, favor, faithfulness have met together, righteousness and favor, or favor, kiss, right? There's lots of different words for these things. But the meaning behind these beautiful words is much more profound than any one English word could express. So the word for peace that's used here is this word shalom, which you've probably heard before. We've talked about it often at Crosspointe. Shalom doesn't mean the absence of war or conflict. It denotes wholeness, completeness in the midst of all of that. It denotes when things are in right order or in right standing with one another. And theologian Lisa Sharon Harper, who we interviewed a while ago, said that shalom is the stuff of the kingdom. It's what the kingdom of God looks like in context. It's what citizenship in the kingdom of God requires, and it is what the kingdom promises to those who choose God and choose God's way to peace. The peace of self is dependent upon the peace of others. God created the world in a web of relationships that overflow with forceful goodness. In other words, to have true shalom in our lives means that we must also work for the shalom of others and our world. So that's shalom, peace. The word being used here for justice or righteousness is tzedek. It is sometimes used to signify charity, although that's not even really a good definition of this, because this is the kind of charity that's describing almost a spontaneous act of goodwill, a marker of personal generosity. And unlike what we think about charity in our current context, this type of justice is a marker of one's spiritual health. It's also considered a religious obligation. It's partly where we get the idea of giving 1/10 of one's income to charity or to others or to the church. This type of justice is a practice that everyone is expected and supposed to participate in, regardless of their socioeconomic status. It can also be defined as social justice or promoting equity. Justice, this type of justice that's being talked about is when things have been corrected and set right. Our relationships, our systems of oppression, our power dynamics, economic equality, racial equity, ethnic equity, gender equity, educational equity, food access. We could go on and on. Justice is when people are treated equally and have the same rights and privileges. That's why this word can also be translated righteousness, because at its core, it is right living. It is working to set the world right. And this is very much what the prophets were calling for. Justice isn't something that we simply just hope for, that we offer thoughts and prayers for while we sit back and sip our lattes and go on with our lives. This is something that requires and expects direct, intentional action on our part. And the psalmist says that justice and peace will kiss. Kissing is an intimate act. In our culture, we don't typically kiss somebody unless we know them, unless we trust them. We have some level of relationship with them. And it wasn't really much different during the time of the Psalms. Justice and peace are intimately connected. It's something that must actively be pursued, and in relationship, it must be participated in order to bring shalom, peace. It does no good to claim that there is peace when there is no justice. Do you know we've seen signs up all the time for no justice, no peace, N-O, no justice, no peace? It's not just a cute saying. Its basis is from the psalmist and from the prophets. Justice and peace are intimately related. The peace called for by the prophets comes about when we are willing to stop ignoring and pretending. It happens when we begin to work for peace in more than just our own lives. It begins with deep, personal rummage sales. And I say sales because although I hate them, personal rummage sales cannot be one-time things. Just like the church seems to do every 500 years or so, it's something that we must also come back to in our lives over and over again. We are called to personal rummage sales in a lot of ways. Maybe it's just self-awareness. Maybe there's events in our lives. Maybe there's people in our lives. Maybe there's books, movies, teachers, friends, people that offer various prophetic voices that require us to make a decision about the renovation that is required in our lives. There's this wonderful story that I loved when I was a little girl, and it was called Hiram's Red Shirt, and it was by this lady named Mabel Watts. And Hiram was this farmer who had one red shirt, and he wore it every single day, and he'd wash it at night and hang it up to dry so he could wear it the next day. Well, one day something terrible happened, the inevitable, you could see this coming. He rips a hole in the elbow of his shirt, and so he tries to solve the problem by cutting off the cuffs of his sleeves, and he patches it onto the elbow. Well, now his elbow doesn't have a hole, but now he has no cufflinks and his cuffs are flapping in the breeze. So he doesn't know what to do. He decides, okay, well, I'm going to cut off my shirt tail to mend my cufflinks. You know where this is going. He can't tuck his shirt in. The mosquitoes bite him. So he cuts off the bottom of his pants to sew a new shirt tail on his shirt. But now the briars get him when he goes in to feed his geese. So it goes on and on and on. And he keeps trying to solve the problem the same old way by repairing something with the old. And eventually, after a conversation with a friend, he determines that he needs to take his piggy bank, his actual piggy bank, it looks like a pig, and he breaks it open and he takes the money and he goes into town and he purchases a brand new shirt. His old shirt becomes a foundation for the scarecrow that's in his garden. He doesn't throw it out, but he uses it as a reminder, of where he's been. And it's this beautiful image of sometimes we have to take a good look at what we're doing and be honest about what is happening and get rid of the things that we no longer need, that are causing us pain and damage and causing pain and damage in other people. Hiram needed to get rid of his old shirt. It needed to be thrown out. And as silly as it sounds, we also have to make a decision like Hiram did, like the Israelites did. We have a choice when we're faced with a personal rummage sale, when we're forced to self-examine. What are we going to do with what we find there? maybe we find that we're right on track and we need to be moving in the right direction, but very rarely do we find that there's not something in there that needs to be reworked. Maybe we find that we are in need of some serious renovation. And when we do a personal rummage sale and find things that no longer should be there, we need to ask ourselves and allow ourselves to be disturbed enough to make changes in ourselves and in our world. Because there is a temptation to sit back and say, that's just who I am, that's the way things always are, or to not do anything about them because of the pain or the inconvenience that might require to make change about something. But Jonathan mentioned this last week. Prophets deal in possibilities, and they not only bring messages of change, they let us know that change is possible and focus us toward what is to come and what can be. Things can be different if we choose a different way, if we choose those rummage sales and choose to go through and make things different in our lives. And it seems to me that during this time, when we're at home, when we're in isolation, we have some more time for personal reflection. There are calls for equity and change in our world. We might be in the middle of some personal rummage sale times. We might be in the middle of societal and church rummage sales, and that's a good thing. The question is going to be, what are we going to do with what we find there? Are we going to choose to say peace when there is no peace? Or are we going to allow things to disturb us enough to move toward possibility and toward change? And that's what I want to leave us with today. I want to give us some time for reflection. I don't have answers for this, just the request that we take time for some personal rummage sales, to look and shine some lights on places and things that maybe we don't want to think about in ourselves and in our society, and then allow ourselves to be disturbed enough by those things to make change. I'm going to lead us in a prayer, and then Stephen's going to lead us in a song about finding the light. And that's a great time to take a few minutes for personal reflection, and I invite you to do that now. So pray with me. The prayer that I'm going to offer up today is by Pope Benedict. God, grant that violence be overcome by the power of love, that opposition give way to reconciliation, and that the desire to oppress be transformed into the desire for forgiveness, justice, and peace. May peace be in our hearts so that we are open to the action of God's grace. Amen.
I wish upon you peace. I wish upon you grace. I wish for less of what you want and more of what you need. I wish upon you an old life with a heart that stays young. But most of all, I wish upon you love. I wish upon you truth when all you feel is doubt. I hope you know that an open mind still knows when to shut things out. I wish upon you a brave heart that will always rise above. But most of all, I wish upon you love. And as the sun sets, well, the moon begins to rise. So even in the darkness, you'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. Even in the darkness, you'll find the light. I wish upon you an easy life. I wish upon you hard times. I hope you know that both joy and pain each need their moment to shine. I wish you ears that are quick to listen, that you're slow to use that tongue. But most of all, I wish upon you love. And as the sun sets, well, the moon begins to rise. So even in the darkness, you'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. So even in the darkness, you'll find the light.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.